Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Joe Vitale. Welcome to Zero Limits Living. Every week, I bring you inspiration and information designed to change your life, transform your life, uplift your life, to give you a life where you can live at zero limits. What does that mean? Well, we're going to talk about it today. We're going to go visit a man who's been dead for about 200 centuries, and we're going to find out what he has to teach us to help us live better in these times, including war and a pandemic and modern things that are making us already stressed out, even more stressed out. So what am I talking about? I have as a guest today, David Fideler, who wrote Breakfast with Seneca. Breakfast with Seneca, a Stoic guide to the art of living. And we're going to explore this and more. Don't jump to any conclusions about Stoicism or what it means to be a Stoic, because there's a whole lot of misconception out there. Let's explore this together and let's get started. David, how are you?
Hey, great to talk with you. Great.
Thank you for making time. I know you had to take a nap and refresh yourself because of the dramatic time differences we're in.
Yeah, it's going on midnight where I live, but I enjoyed the opportunity to take a nap all day long. So I feel
all day long.
Fine. So
wait a minute. I don't think that's called a nap if it was all day.
Right.
Anyway, I could not wait to get you here because I pre-ordered your book. And then when the book came, I bought multiple copies, partly because I was going to read it more than once and partly because I was giving copies away to people. I love your book. The editors at Amazon said this is the best book or one of the best books of this year so far. And I have been underlining it. I have been studying it. And Seneca has been my friend for quite some time. If I get a chance, I'll talk about how he influenced me. But to begin with, how did you stumble across this man from 200 centuries ago, from 2,000 years ago? How did you come across Seneca?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. I studied ancient philosophy my entire life, and I'd read a little bit about the Stoics and everything, but it was only about 15 years ago that I came across Seneca, and I just started reading him, and I was undergoing kind of a small crisis at the moment, at that moment, and his words just like leapt off the page to me. And because I've been involved in the world of philosophy, I really took notice because most philosophers talk about really theoretical issues. And
Yes.
Seneca talked about issues that affect human beings in their day-to-day lives. And so his words had a lot of impact on me. And they showed to me what real philosophy was really about.
And you ended up reading all of his letters?
Yeah, I read all of his letters. I started off, there's this little paperback called Letters from a Stoic, which is just like maybe about half of them, if even that. So I just ordered all of his books and I started reading them. And actually, I've been reading them ever since. I developed this little ritual where I'd read a little bit of Seneca or one of his letters at breakfast. And that's where the title of the book came from.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous because I thought, man, that's a really good idea. Now I'm going to write a book called Coffee with Seneca or Dinner with Seneca, just to go with the theme that you've got going. He is an in-depth character. And one of the things that fascinates me, and there's so many questions I have, but I know that you are a writer. You've written quite a few other books, as I found out when I did some research. And you have been an editor, and you've also run a publishing house. And one of the things that fascinates me, and I mean absolutely fascinates me, is how clear his writing is. How is that possible? He wrote 2,000 years ago. There are people writing today that don't make any sense. There are people who wrote in the 1800s that I'm still trying to figure out, what did he mean when he said this? Seneca is as clear as a bell. How is that possible? I know he was writing for us. He was thinking of future generations, which I find so noble and mind expanding. But is this a result of just translations and clarity of editors, or was he that much of a genius?
Well, I think he was that much of a genius. He was trained to be a great public speaker. And his father, Seneca the Elder, was a teacher of rhetoric. And so obviously Seneca the Younger, our Seneca, picked up all of those speaking and rhetorical skills from his father. He has this incredibly great style where he'll be writing something and then he'll sum up everything in like a little epigram. And it's very much like the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson in a sense.
Yes.
And I think Emerson copied that from him because Emerson was a huge Seneca fan. I think Emerson got that from Seneca because it's really a unique writing style, but it's very powerful.
It's interesting that everything influences everything. I've been a big fan of Emerson for the longest time. I mean, for decades. And now to hear that, wait a minute, he was probably influenced by Seneca. It's like everybody is being influenced by everybody. I mean, it's not a complaint, it's an observation, and it's also a wonderful perk. But now, before we go too deep into this, we need to define Stoicism. Right. Because we both know, and I had this problem too, that for most people, a Stoic is a robot. It's a person without feelings. It's somebody so in control, almost a Spock from the original Star Trek series, that they have no human capability to relate. What is Stoicism, and how in the world did we get to the erroneous view of it?
Right. Well, Stoicism, it was ancient philosophy. It started in Greece, like around 300 BC. And then it continued to evolve. And then there were the Roman Stoics, of which Seneca was really the first major one. But the problem that we have is that Stoic is like many other words. It totally lost its original meaning. And now it means to like have a stiff upper lip or repress your emotions or something like that. There's nothing like that at all in ancient Stoicism. And in fact, the Stoics studied emotions. They thought there were like 4 basic types of emotions. And they only had complaints about extreme negative emotions like anger, rage, envy, and things like that, which they thought were based on bad opinions or beliefs. But nowhere do the Stoics talk about repressing their emotions. In fact, Seneca wrote about grief, and Marcus Aurelius wept in public. So they didn't have any problem with experiencing normal human feelings.
And it's good that you mentioned that. As I was rereading your book even today to prepare for this interview, I went through the section on grieving. And that's part of what brought me to Stoicism. 2.5 years ago, I entered a divorce that became a persecution of my life and business. During that time, my father died, my best friend died, a family member attempted suicide. A new relationship developed with a woman who got neural Lyme disease, and I was taking care of her during all of this. And there was immense grieving going on. And part of me wrestled with, oh, I'm the law of attraction guy. I'm the guy in The Secret. I shouldn't be feeling all of this. It should be other than this. And then in exploring, looking for my life raft, I find Seneca, and the poster boy for Stoicism is Marcus Aurelius. I find these guys, and they are saying it's okay to grieve. And in your book, even today, as I was reading it, you were talking about Seneca talking about allowing it, not, there's a phrase he used, but not allowing it to run forever. So can you speak to that for a moment, just in the off chance somebody is grieving or needs to hear this?
Right. Actually, Seneca wrote a lot about grief. One of the things that's just amazing about Seneca as a philosopher is that he always thought that philosophy involved like a person-to-person connection. So all of his philosophical writings were directed to people that he knew who were either friends or family members of his. And he wrote 5 different essays on grief. So he wrote about it quite a lot. In fact, I had a similar experience to you. I had a close friend who made a suicide attempt when I was reading Seneca. And of course, fortunately, it wasn't successful, but it was like the bottom of my world fell out. It felt like it had fallen out emotionally. And at that point, I started reading Seneca with a lot more intensity because it seemed like his words had some kind of like medicinal qualities, which actually they do if you're in that kind of mindset. And what Seneca said, like I said, the Stoics said that there were like 4 different types of emotions. And I'd actually like to talk. I'm going to segue into feeling the grief of war because of everything that's going into.
Oh, let's do it.
Ukraine now.
That's heavy on my mind. I was just in the Ukraine. I was in Russia, and to have this experience going on, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I wrote an article about this the other day that's at a newspaper right now. They're considering it, and if not, I'll run it on my Stoic Insights website. But it's called Why We Feel the Grief of War. And for Seneca, grief was just, they had these 4 different types of emotions. And one is just like natural human feelings, which are basically instinctual feelings. Now, the kind of bad emotions for the Stoics are based on bad mental judgments. But like grief, Seneca says, it's just a natural human feeling. So if you love someone and they die, or you lose a pet or whatever, you're going to experience grief. And he said, it's fine. You should let the tears flow. He said, you should exercise some moderation in it. So you should weep, but not wail, and not make a public spectacle out of it. But it's a perfectly normal emotion. And he had this wonderful strategy for overcoming grief, which is that if you lose a loved one, someone dies, then what you can do is you can think about all of the wonderful times that you had together and experience gratitude for the time that you spent with that person. And that way, slowly over time, these feelings of gratitude will replace the feelings of grief. And I expressed that with my dad when he died, and I hadn't read Seneca at that point. But when I look back on my dad now, I don't feel any grief at all about losing him. I just feel happy memories about the time that we spent together. Now, why would we feel the grief of war? Well, the Stoics believed that love and affection was the primary human emotion. And because of that, it's something that we actually see in animals too. Cicero was like writing about this and reporting on the ideas of the Stoics. And he said, we can see this in animals where parents care for their offspring with all of this, great care and attention. And when we see this, we're hearing the voice of nature itself. And this is something that exists in human beings too, except with human beings, this kind of love and affection, it inspires us to band together and feel kinship for one another, and even create societies and, the forms of societies like government. So basically, the Stoics believed that love was the most primary emotion. And it's because of that we're social animals. Now, there was another factor too, which is reason. And they believed that all human beings had rationality in common, which makes us equal. And so there's a universal brotherhood of humanity, which is another way that we're linked together with other people. And the early Christian idea of the brotherhood of humanity seems to have come from the Stoic idea. So these are 2 powerful ways that we're linked with other people through love, and also because we all have a spark of rationality within us, which makes us brothers and sisters with one another. So
we're observing war going on. We're hearing, I have friends in Ukraine. I've had phone calls from people when bombs were going off around them, and friends who are crying as they call. What is the Stoic way of handling this?
Oh, well, I was trying to think about that. There's also this really great poem from a Persian Sufi, Sadi, and I can't quote it exactly because I don't have it memorized, but basically he took a very Stoic view. He said that we human beings are all members of a common organism or one humanity. And when another person experiences suffering, it's natural for us to feel the suffering as well, because we're part of the same whole. And if you don't feel that suffering, then you're really not. Why do you deserve to even be called a human being? So when we read all of this news and we see these horrifying images, I just saw an image of a pregnant woman who had been injured in an attack on a building, and she was like walking down the stairs. And we've all seen these horrible images. And so I was thinking about, how can we deal with this? And the only answer I was able to come up with is sort of following Seneca's advice in terms of being grateful for what we've had or what we have. Now, when you like lose a person, you can be grateful for what you had with them. But in a situation like this, I think most of us haven't spent a lot of, we don't have like a lot of happy memories of being in the Ukraine or anything like that. So I think we just have to look around us and be grateful for the things that we have. Like I have a beautiful family. I have a house with a roof over my head. I have heating. I live in Sarajevo. All of our gas comes from Russia. They've cut it off in the past. So who knows what will happen. But at this moment, I just try to be as grateful as possible. And that seems to help quite a bit.
And gratitude is a very big element in Stoicism too. Towards the end of your book, you spend quite a bit of time talking about this. And I want to look at this for a couple of reasons. One was I was in the Ukraine. And so I spoke there. I have friends there. I was interviewed there. So I have very happy memories that I am grateful for. The man who got me speaking engagements in countries like Iran and Russia and Ukraine is still in the Ukraine. And he is my primary contact. And one of the things he said is that this is to help us awaken to what we've been taking for granted. Because even during the time of COVID, which we're still going through a pandemic, and Marcus Aurelius went through a pandemic that lasted, I think, 10 years, if I remember correct. We're still going through that. And so there's a whole lot of complaining. There's a whole lot of people that are not taking an inventory of what they can be grateful for. And now in the Ukraine, they've lost what they did have for the most part. And they're learning that, I had something that I was grateful for, but I wasn't conscious of it. So this whole experience could be a trigger to make us conscious of what we're grateful for now. And I'm leading into an opportunity for you to speak a little bit about gratitude, because I found it pretty profound that Seneca and the Stoic gang really did talk about gratitude for everything, including their version of God, which you'll need to define at some point. Can you speak about gratitude?
Yes. I just have to say one more thing about the grief of war, and that is the thing that makes this so difficult is that not only are we seeing all this human suffering, but there's another element to it as well. And what that element is that we're living in a new world now, and we've totally lost the world that we thought we were living in. So if people feel unease about that, I think that's actually quite natural, because we thought that, for example, Russia could be in some way some kind of reliable partner. And now we've really seen what Putin is like. So that makes it all the worse. In any case, to talk about gratitude, it's really amazing. This is something that's very overlooked in modern writings on Stoicism. But if you do a really careful reading of the three main Roman Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, they all talk about it. And one of the most amazing things that I came across when researching this book is that I discovered that actually all three of them say that when you're on your deathbed dying, that you should feel grateful for the life that the universe has given to you. And that to me would be a mark of a life that was really worth living, because you wouldn't have any regrets about it. You'd be very happy with the life that you had. And that was the ultimate goal of Stoicism in some ways, really to help people discover a life that's truly worth living and fulfilling on a very deep basis. And Epictetus said, he came right after Seneca. He said, when I'm dying, I want to be grateful for the fact that I've been able to witness and participate in this great festival of human life. And I want to be grateful for the fact that I've been able to study the order of the universe as a philosopher and reflect upon its beauty. And I want to be thinking these thoughts, writing these thoughts, and speaking these thoughts as I'm dying.
And when they said
That's
universe,
profound.
I wanted you to to explain their concept of God. A lot of the people that might watch this show, if they pay attention to me, are in the new agey kind of new thought, feeling, and movement. And they think of God as the universe. They don't typically think of God in the Christian, there's a person that's overseeing. How do the Stoics, or Seneca in particular, look at God? What would he say my definition of God is?
Mm-hmm. Well, they said that there are all these different terms that apply to God, but basically, I think he looked at it very similar to the way that you do, because we can identify God with the universe, because the Stoics were pantheists. And so the Stoics would often speak of like nature. And when they spoke of nature, they'd be referring to God. So one of the things that you find in ancient Greek philosophy, really across the board, and is very strong in the Stoics, is that none of them believed in a Christian theistic type of God that stood outside of the universe and drew up a blueprint and then said, let it be, and the world came into being. Now, they believed that the universe was rationally ordered and intelligent in some way. And that's really what the Stoics stress. Now, they do use the term God a lot, but I know some people are uncomfortable with the term God. I'm really not, because I've studied religions all my life. But if anyone's reading the Stoics and they're uncomfortable with the term God, they can just replace it with the term nature or the universe.
Which is what you say. And you say that specifically in your book.
Yeah.
Now, there's certain things, I hope you don't mind me jumping around, because there's so much in your book, and you're the first person I've actually gotten to talk to about Stoicism that knows about Stoicism in the pure form. And I've been wrestling with a lot of the Stoics and a lot of the things I've been reading and trying to fit it in with the beliefs that I've acquired over the years and the training that I've had in different areas. So let's look at something in particular. There's the negative visualization that the Stoics were known for, and Seneca has talked about. And that is, do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, Seneca was really big into that. And he said that most sources of human worry, he wrote a lot about how to overcome worry and anxiety. And he said that most worry is about the future. And he was a very skilled proto-psychologist. In fact, he talks about psychological phenomena and techniques that didn't even have names in English until like the last 100 years or the last 50 years, which is really amazing. But he said that the reason people have anxiety is that they worry about the future, which hasn't even come yet. And then he has this other technique, which they called premeditatio malorum in Latin, which is the premeditation of adversity, which William Irvine, he calls that negative visualization. And what that involves is just if you're feeling anxiety or worry about the future or some event that might happen, what Seneca would say is just, lightly touch upon it with your mind and imagine that it's happening, and then let it go. And he said that if you think about possible adversities in advance and they actually arrive, then you will have robbed them of a lot of their power. And I've used that technique quite a bit, and it does work quite well, at least for me and for some of the people that I know. Now, if you're someone and you try that out and it starts making you feel really anxious, you probably shouldn't do that. But Seneca talks about that at great length. And he it's basically a fire drill, like everyone's done this. Like if you're a kid in school and you've done a fire drill, then it's the same technique, because then if there was actually a fire, you would have thought about how to respond to it in advance and just get out of the building safely.
That is actually a very great example. It's like a fire drill. We all went through that in schools around the world growing up. One of my favorite quotes, I wrote some of my favorites down and I wanted to talk to you about them, but one of them ties into what you just said. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." We suffer more in imagination than in reality. And so many times have I gone through that, especially through the 2.5 years legal process there, where my mind would run off on the possible things that could happen, which caused anxiety and worry. And we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Also turned out to be true. It was an easier process than what I imagined. The thing that I want to say that backs up what Seneca's technique is, when I was getting ready to perform as a singer-songwriter for the first time in my life with my band of legends, who are legends, I'm not, they were and are. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified of going on stage as a singer-songwriter for the first time. And I did everything. I was visualizing it going well, and I was practicing, and I was reading, and I was doing all that I knew to do to prep. And I took a course with Usher, who at the time I didn't even know who he was. And I was told that I shouldn't say that because he's so famous that everybody should know who he is. And Usher's course was remarkable. And in it, he said something that was very Seneca-like. He said, you're going to prepare, you're going to visualize, you're going to memorize, you're going to do everything to make your night fantastic. And he said, on the night of your performance, something will go wrong. And I got chills. I thought, what? Why are you telling me this? And he said, if you know that something will go wrong on the night of the performance, when it happens, you won't be surprised. You won't be stopped. You will actually just kind of catch your breath and keep moving. And he was absolutely right. On the night of my performance, something did go wrong. Because I knew something could go wrong, I didn't know what, I was able to regain my momentum, do the show, got a standing ovation. The rest is history. That was like Seneca's fire drill technique.
Right.
Correct?
Right. I used this technique when I bought this house here in Sarajevo, because it had these really steep stairs going up to the bedroom. And my wife and I had a baby who was pretty young. You know, he's maybe like 2 years old or something like that. And the stairs were really dangerous. As we'd say in the US, they weren't built up to code, extremely dangerous. So I did everything I could rationally to solve everything. I put in a railing. There was no railing there. I couldn't believe it. I put in one of those gates at the top of the stairs, which we could lock at night so no one could fall down by mistake. Then I put friction tape on the stairs. And then that was all that I could do. And what I did after that was I imagined my son slipping and falling down the stairs, which I figured would probably happen anyways. I kept telling him, I would say every morning he'd wake up, I'd say, Benjamin, hold on the railing, go down the stairs really slowly. He'd say, okay, okay. But one day he did fall down the stairs. And fortunately, he was just a few steps up, and he scraped himself up a little bit, but he was perfectly fine. But the benefit of visualizing that in advance is that I knew exactly what to do. I had peace of mind. I wasn't in a panic. And I was just able to deal with it, you know, rationally. There had been an earlier incident when he was in kindergarten, and he fell off a slide in the kindergarten and hit his head, and he needed stitches. He was bleeding a little bit. And my wife was so overwhelmed by panic that she could barely talk to me on the phone. So I didn't want to be in that situation. So it shows how if you sometimes imagine these things happening in advance, it just robs those events of their power.
The people that typically read my books and follow me and maybe watch this show have learned about the power of creating their future by visualizing it. Did Seneca at any point talk about the opposite of this negative visualization, a positive expectancy kind of visualization?
He was very much into the idea that we make incremental progress in life in terms of developing better characters. And so his idea was that we should reflect on our behavior each day, and then we move forward and we keep improving our character over time. I was thinking about this, though, because I know that you've written about these things. And the Stoics said it's not things or events that upset us, but the opinions or judgments we hold about things. And that does relate to something that you've spoken about in the past, where a lot of people have very negative opinions about themselves. And so they're sort of like psychologically sabotaging themselves, and they're not able to accomplish things. And the opposite of that, the Stoics didn't really write about that, but the opposite of that is that you don't want to do that. You want to think that you're able to accomplish things. I've met a lot of people who feel that they can't accomplish things. And I'm pretty much in the opposite camp. I sometimes unrealistically believe that I can accomplish things, but I think it's better to think that way instead of having such, negative opinions about yourself.
Well, there's a couple of quotes that I did write down that seem relevant to what we're talking about here. Seneca said, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." Do you remember that quote?
Yes.
You act like mortals in all that you fear, like I'm going to die today, and like immortals in all that you desire. Any comment, any expansion on that quote?
Well, he talked about like hope and fear. And he spoke about, he quoted one earlier Stoic who said that if you want to be less fearful, you should be less hopeful about things, because people sometimes imagine these things, like when he says like people are thinking like gods, they're thinking on a grandiose scale, perhaps. And if you have these elevated expectations all the time, then it's obvious that you'll be disappointed about them sometimes. But I was thinking about this in terms of my own life. And if you're willing to discuss this for a few minutes about hypnosis.
Yes.
Because I know that you've had interest in hypnosis. You wrote a book on hypnotic marketing.
Oh, since the 1960s. Yes, it's still in my life.
Right. And the reason this does actually relate to Seneca's thought, because he wrote about what we now call like crowd psychology, where sometimes you'll get these groups of people that fall into kind of what we would call like a hypnotic trance today, and it can be very negative. And hypnosis suggestion is very important. Now, one thing that Seneca writes about is how if we surround ourselves with people who have bad characters, that will pick up those characteristics. But the opposite is true. If we surround ourselves with people who have good characters, then we'll absorb those as well. And I think this actually relates to the phenomenon of hypnosis in some sense, because it's based on suggestions. And I had a very interesting experience when I was a teenager, because I was precocious and I studied hypnosis. I got a very serious book on it, and then I got a how-to book on it. And I started hypnotizing my friends. And eventually I had to give it up. But the first person I hypnotized was a babysitter. And she went into a really deep trance.
Wait a minute. Was this your babysitter?
Yes, this was my babysitter.
Oh, boy. What a skit this could be.
Okay. And I just want to tell you about this because I learned something really incredible from doing this. Although I did give up on it because it became frightening after a while. But I put her into a very deep trance. And then I gave her the suggestion, I'm going to pinch your arm and you won't feel this. So I pinched her arm pretty hard and she didn't feel it. Then I brought her up out of the trance and I said, oh my God, I really hypnotized someone. That's unbelievable. I was really good at it, actually. So then what I did is I moved on and I started hypnotizing all of my friends. But what I discovered is that no one would believe that they had been under hypnosis. So what I would do is I would make them, when they were under the trance, I'd make them stand up and then go into another room. And then when I'd bring them up out of the trance, then they would have to admit that they'd been hypnotized because they had no memory of walking to the other room. So I did this with a number of my friends. And finally, the last friend that I hypnotized, I was sitting in a room with him and I had a filing cabinet in there that had some magnets on him. And I gave him a post-hypnotic suggestion. And I said, well, I'm going to bring you up out of the trance, but then after you come out of the trance for 5 minutes, every time I pick up a magnet from the filing cabinet, you're going to like scratch your head. And I brought him out of the trance. I picked up the magnet and he scratched his head. And at that point, I was in shock. And I said, I can't do this anymore because of the ethical implications of it. It was really spooky, actually. But it made me realize something about human nature, because if it's that easy to hypnotize people, this must be something. And first of all, I don't think anyone really understands fully how hypnosis works. It's so close to our human nature that it's just part of human nature. And so what I concluded from that is that basically, like, society itself is a hypnotic experiment where everyone is in a trance, in a sense, a collective trance, and we're being influenced by that trance and we're contributing to it as well. And I think that that has to do a lot with like human accomplishments and dreams and things like that, because of instead of repeating these negative suggestions to yourself that I'm not capable of doing something, when I work on projects, for example, I'm constantly, like, over months and months prepping myself that this is something that could actually take place. And so I think all of that is a form of self-hypnosis, and that hypnosis itself is something, it's just part of human nature. It's morally neutral, and we can use it for good or ill. So it's much better.
You were a phenomenal hypnotist, by the way, based on what you were telling me. How old were you?
I was in my teens. There was only one person I was not able to hypnotize, actually.
Yeah.
But you can't hypnotize everyone. That's what they say.
Well, and my view is, much like you did make the comment, we're all in a trance. We're all in a trance of one sort or another. But this is one of the reasons why I like Seneca, because Seneca is focusing on your mind. In fact, there's a line in one of his letters where he says, everything hangs on your thinking. And my favorite quote, in fact, I printed it on my index cards, my favorite quote of his, which ties in all of this, and is my reminder that I look at almost every day. You have the power to make things seem hard or easy or even amusing. Now, you got to think, I was going through, you talked about the crises you were going through. I was going through divorce, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking at this going, I have the power to make things seem hard. Well, they already seemed hard, so that one's done. But he also says, or easy. And I had to sit with that going, easy. That means I have to shift my mind to look at this completely differently. And in your book, you talk about how they turn everything into something good. In other words, whatever took place, we just kind of recycle it. We reframe it. Right. So easy was another way of looking at it. But then the big one is there, or even amusing. And I'd go through this legal stuff going, how is this amusing? How is this amusing? But what he was inviting me to do, and I am forever grateful for a man who's been dead for 2,000 years, for giving me as that hypnotic command. It was a hypnotic command to open my mind to consider there might be some humor in this. And at some point when I'm further away from it, I might write some jokes about it, or I might write a skit or a humorous novel. Who knows? But the opening to consider it differently came from Seneca's quote. I have the power to see it as hard or easy or even amusing. This is one of the reasons I like Stoicism. Now, David, I've been nice. I want to ask you, I want to be more in your face and blunt, especially since you were a hypnotist when you were a teenager.
I gave it up, though.
I know, I'm teasing you a little bit. Here's my deal. I've been trying to balance Stoicism with law of attraction, create your own reality, Napoleon Hill, modern science, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, a lot of the leading figures who talk about creating your own reality. The Stoics almost seem to be empowered victims. That's my phrase. they almost seem to be empowered victims. It's like, okay, we've got pandemic, we got world war, we got starvation. Seneca is exiled. At the end of his life, he's ordered to commit suicide. I mean, he takes it well, which is what an empowered victim would do. And Marcus Aurelius, what did he have? He had 13 children, and didn't he lose almost all of them? By the time, I don't think maybe 4 or 5 made it as an adult.
Right.
And what Stoicism helped each of these people to do was to almost be imperturbed by the event itself. And it is one of the lessons, you mentioned it earlier, it's one of the lessons about being aware of what you have control over and what you don't have control over. And what I'm trying to find the balance is, according to the current research that I'm seeing, is that we have more control and more power than Seneca ever knew. And the only escape clause I can see, and this was also in your book, is that Seneca did make references that there will be new discoveries in the future. And the new discoveries will be new information that if he were alive, he would have adapted to. So I'm kind of throwing all of this as a hand grenade at your feet to see how you respond to it. Because you, as I said, you're my Stoicism expert here. You're my Seneca buddy. I haven't talked to anybody else about this, and I'm genuinely wrestling with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting question. The Stoics did believe that by changing our beliefs, we could by changing our beliefs, we could change our experience of the world psychologically and in an emotional sense. And in terms of the law of attraction, I'm not sure they would go that far, but obviously they felt that we could accomplish things. I mean, look at Seneca. Seneca was one of the most powerful and wealthy people in the ancient world. And that obviously didn't come about by chance. He applied himself. And I really do like that idea that you brought up earlier about how a Stoic can go in and take any situation, no matter how negative it is, and turn it into something positive. So
that's huge. That's huge. That's one of the things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me just give an example of that, because what they felt is that no matter how bad a situation is that if you respond to it with a good character or with virtue, that you'll take a bad situation and turn it into something good. So let's say you're walking down the street one night and you see some lights ahead and you smell some smoke, and you get closer and you see it's a very bad car accident. So if you step in there to intervene and try to help the person in the car accident who is injured there, then you've taken a very negative situation and you've turned it into something very memorable. So obviously, the Stoics believed that, we had the ability to, create better lives for ourselves. On the other hand, they were believers in fate as well. But, that's sort of like the law of cause and effect. But that doesn't really stand in the way of influencing the world, because we're part of the web of fate. So we sort of like spin fate outwards. In terms
which I
of
liked.
Stuff, yeah.
When it comes to beliefs, how do beliefs structure reality from Seneca's view, or any of the Stoics?
Well, they don't speak about that much, but they speak about it in terms of psychology, because what they say is that all the extreme negative emotions that we experience that are based on bad judgments, those come from beliefs. Now, personally, I believe that our beliefs do shape the way that we experience reality in a much deeper way than that, because I studied the relationship between our worldviews and culture, and also like scientific worldviews. And what I discovered is that our scientific beliefs about the universe have a very profound influence on the way that we relate to the world and to other people. So when, for example, in the scientific revolution, when people started seeing the world as a machine rather than a living organism, then it totally changed the way that we related to the world and other people, and all of these problems.
That's very interesting. We're going to be running out of time here, so I want to ask a couple key and fun questions. One of them is, what do you think is the chief takeaway from Seneca? Meaning, the people that are watching this, you heard the introduction. This is called Zero Limits Living. I bring information and inspiration every week to help people live a happier life, a healthier life, a more prosperous life, a life that I'm wearing a t-shirt. I don't think you can see it. I think it says ataraxia on there, going for the inner happiness that Seneca and the boys talked about. What do you think is the chief takeaway that people should really be doing, gnawing on, thinking about, meditating on, sleeping on, whatever comes to mind?
Well, what I would say is the basic Stoic idea that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. And the whole end goal of Stoicism, in one sense, was to experience a state of mental tranquility, like you said, and lasting joy. And even though we experience these things that seem to be like bad luck or setbacks and things like that, they don't need to hold you back. And in fact, part of the goal of Stoic training was to rise above the realm of chance like that. So you can observe these things happening, but Seneca has this beautiful image that when the soul is really at peace, it's like the sun shining, and there will be these little disturbances like clouds, floating beneath the sun and things like that, but they're not affecting the peace, the tranquility, or the joy of the sun. And I love so that was sort of like the end state that he wanted his readers to arrive at.
Well, the other thing I think is worth mentioning is that isn't Stoicism an ideal? In other words, it's not a final and maybe not attainable result. It's something we are striving for. I had a t-shirt that I was going to wear earlier. It had the word better on it. And it's almost like what we're striving for is to be better, not to be done, not to be the best, but to be better. Does that fit, or is there another way of looking at what?
Yeah, that's exactly what Seneca said. He said, I might not be the best, but I'm better than the worst. And if I'm making a little bit of progress every day, I'm happy with that. And there was this sort of like mythic figure of the Stoic Sage who was sort of perfect in the sense that the Stoic Sage was like perfectly wise and didn't make bad judgments or bad mental judgments. And because of that, the Stoic Sage didn't experience these extreme negative emotions like anger and rage and things like that. And I think that's sort of like a symbol or an archetype. It's, Seneca said that the Stoic Sage was so rare that it only appeared every 500 years, like the phoenix.
500 years? I thought it was just every 5,000 years. Every 500. Well, you spent like 2 years writing your book, didn't you? Spending your 2 years of breakfasts with Seneca. So here's the fun question. If I finished the time machine that I started building in the 1960s after I saw the movie The Time Machine, and I got it to actually work, and I sent you back in time 2,000 years, and Seneca's there, what would you ask him? What do you wish you could ask the man if you truly could have breakfast with Seneca?
Well, I think one interesting question would be, what was it like psychologically for him to work with Nero? But the other thing is that he spent 10 years of his life in Alexandria because he had a lung condition. And there's absolutely not a single shred of information about what he did. I probably wouldn't ask him about any philosophical questions because I think he really wrote all of his philosophy down, and it's something that you can absorb. But what I would say too is if you were to go back in a time machine in my life and look at the quality of my life, I would say that Stoicism has really helped me. For example, I'm way less anxious. I get angry, much less often and things like that. And so people who've really tried to practice these ideas find that they do work. And that's why I find it meaningful to write about them, because I know that a lot of people could benefit from them.
You know, Stoicism, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and the guys, they've had a surge of popularity. What do you think that is attributed to? I mean, Ryan Holiday is a marketing guy, and he's been writing books and promoting them, and that would be part of it. But is there another reason why Stoicism seems to have resurfaced after such a long time?
Yeah, I think it's because it's kind of a rational form of spirituality in a sense. And there's been a drift away from organized religions, but it's also part of our own Western tradition. And a lot of people, I don't really look at it this way, but a lot of people who become interested in Stoicism, they sort of see it as like a Western form of Buddhism. So it is part of our tradition. And it's something that stretches back like 2,300 years. And there have been Stoics all throughout history up until the present time. So I just think that it's striking a chord with people. And also the world of Hellenistic times and the Roman Empire in Seneca's time, it did feel like it was out of control. And I think there are a lot of people that justifiably feel that the world that we live in is now, it feels increasingly out of control, not only politically and ecologically, but look at the war in Ukraine. It's like I said earlier, it's like we felt that we were living in some kind of other world that doesn't even exist anymore, that doesn't have that kind of security to it. So This is the Stoic moment. I mean, I think it can help a lot of people right now.
And the inner and the security is inside. What is my final question for you? What is a question you wish I would ask or somebody would ask you?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, the question I had for you was, I saw how passionate you were about Seneca. So I wanted to ask you really how you met up with Seneca and became so interested in his writings. So you did explain some of that.
I did.
Yeah.
It was me searching for sanity and salvation as I was going through a divorce that I thought was going to be easy, and it became a persecution, which became a nightmare. And I was thrown into a world, the judicial system and the theater of the court, which I had no experience in and truly felt like a victim in. I was looking for my support, my raft, my escape clause, something. And as you can see with the background, I'm a heavy reader. I've always been a bookaholic. And I was reading Marcus Aurelius. I know of Ryan Holiday. We know of each other. I've not met him. So I was reading all of his books. Seneca kept coming up. And as I dabbled in all of them, Seneca was the one that was the easiest to understand, the clearest writer. He had the most memorable lines, just like I liked that one line so much, I printed it on my card. Right. You know, you have the power to make things look hard or easy or even amusing. And he has felt like a spiritual brethren, a spiritual guide in my life. And then I couldn't wait for your book, Breakfast with Seneca, everybody. It's on Amazon. Go get it. A Stoic Guide to the Art of Living. And I'm still wrestling with it. I wish I could talk to him too. I'd show him the movie The Secret. We talk about the law of attraction, and I'd say, Seneca, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, Seneca believed that it was really important to have friends in your life, but he said that it was also important to develop friends from the past. And I think that having Seneca as a friend from the past is one of the best friends that anyone could have.
Well, Seneca also said, and I'll end with this quote, he said, whenever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for a kindness.
Yes.
And you have been very kind to me and my viewers, especially by taking your nap, sleep, siesta. I don't know what it was that got you here, but you were fresh and looked great. And thank you so much for me and on behalf of everybody. Folks, Breakfast with Seneca. It's on Amazon. Go get it. I've been talking to David Fideler, A Stoic Guide to the Art of Living. I'm Dr. Joe Vitale. This is Zero Limits Living. Every Friday, I bring you inspiration and information to help you live a life of zero limits. If you can imagine it, if you can conceive it, you can have it. Napoleon Hill said that. Seneca may or may not have agreed. Who knows? Until next week, Godspeed. I want to thank Lux Media, Candace Barr, Chris, who's running the studio. You can watch the show on YouTube, on the Lux TV app, on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Roku, or go to my website, ZeroLimitsLivingTV.com, ZeroLimitsLivingTV.com. Expect miracles.
Glutathione is a big word. It's the body's own master antioxidant. It's a scavenger for free radical, bacteria, and viruses. There are no products in the market with the ingredient NASET. NASET increases the production of glutathione that's in our body already to strengthen and enhance our immune system, elevate sense of well-being, support muscle strength and endurance, cognitive function, and liver support. It helps with increased energy and blood sugar regulation. Get your bottle of GSH Plus from www.salvationnutra.com.